we got to talk about Sam Smith, because last Sunday, when we're recording this, it was last Sunday. I think this goes up a week later. There was the Grammys, and Sam Smith. First of all, David, do you know who Sam Smith is?
Barely.
Did you know who he was before I sent you the article the other day?
Probably if you'd said his name, I wouldn't have known who he was.
I mean, I barely know who he is. I also am very, not to say you're out of touch, but I am out of touch. I'm definitely out of touch with pop music and probably pop culture as a whole. But he's a pop artist, and he's gone through a few iterations of himself, if you will. I think at first he came out as gay, and now he's a they. He's a they them, I think. Trends. I don't know. He looks like a man to me. I don't mean to be denigrating, but I don't understand. So he had this performance, and he dressed up as the devil, and it was, I guess he's, trying to make Satan look sexy, and had a bunch of, dancers and all that. And I think there was some like women dressed quite, what's the word I'm looking for?
Provocatively.
Ah, yes, provocatively in a cage. And I guess that it was singing a single that he has. The single is called Unholy. So, no surprises there. And he co-wrote it or co-performed it with a transgender woman. So a man. And again, as much as I disagree with all of this stuff, I'm not trying to make, mean mockery. I just legitimately get confused about these things sometimes. And so the internet blew up. All of the conservative movement in America had a lot to say about it, and rightfully so. It is insane looking and actually revolting. The performance is revolting. And yet it's crazy to me. Like, it actually does baffle me that on a Sunday night at the Grammys, this is what you're going to now expect to watch. Like, I watched the Grammys all the time as a teenager, and it was, probably some risque stuff on there. But I don't think my parents ever had to worry about a pop star dressing up as the devil himself and having some girls dance in a cage, sending a very interesting message about not just sexuality, but maybe even spirituality. I'm not sure. Any thoughts from you?
Well, C.S. Lewis, I think, had it right when he said the enemy is at his most powerful when he's disguised. And in a way, I think when it starts to come out into the open, Satan kind of blows his cover. And so what's hardly more dangerous was when you were watching it and there was stuff happening, but it wasn't completely obviously wrong, but it was wrong. Now at least you can see that it's wrong. And in one sense, I feel when the enemy comes out into the open, then we know what we're dealing with. And, people have to make a choice. I mean, is it disgusting, disgraceful, however you want to put it, that sort of thing is aired on television? Yes, it is. Absolutely. Would you want your children watching it, or would you want to watch it yourself? No, you wouldn't. Same as some of the halftime shows for Super Bowl and stuff like that. It's just got worse and worse. But I do think it's coming out into the open. And that in some respects is not a bad thing, because people get to thinking, is this where it's heading? Is this where the sort of postmodern, critical theory, woke stuff is heading? It's easy when people are using some legitimate concern like racial injustice, and they're using it to promote a far deeper agenda.
Right.
But people are sucked into it because externally or at first sight, it seems to be a just cause.
Right.
But then you get sucked into it and a whole lot of other stuff starts to happen. But this is just blatant. And so a lot of people looking at it, people who aren't Christians at all, looking at it, probably are saying, hey, okay, I signed on to some of this and being sympathetic, but if this is where it's going, I don't really think I want myself or my children living in this kind of world.
Let's explore that a little bit. So when you say, hey, I signed on to this, but I don't like where it's going, that's one of the things that I was thinking about. What are some of the earlier stages of where we've arrived that people signed on to, perhaps in, naivety, or likely in naivety, without realizing that this is where the train was headed? Like, what's the philosophical?
Well, I think
undergirding.
It's easy to sell a message that, people who are, for instance, in the LGBTQ plus, they keep adding numbers and letters. People who are in that community have had a hard time of it. They've been treated badly. They've been semi-persecuted, and that's not right. And so people look at that and say, yeah, I'm sympathetic to that. I think that that's wrong. Everyone, should be treated equally and with dignity and so on. And that's the thin end of the wedge. But in behind it comes a whole nother agenda. And the agenda is actually to eradicate people who have a different moral perspective and to promote the agenda of a very small minority, which, has gone way beyond it's gone way beyond the sort of, wider LGBTQ community to the transgender part, which is, at max 1 in 300 people. And that's probably only because a lot of young people are being bulldozed into thinking that, at the age when their sexuality is, they're coming into it.
Or much earlier.
Yeah.
There are plenty of stories at children being encouraged towards this.
Right. And so it's an extremely tiny minority of people.